Hello again, everyone. This is the Ball Over Passion podcast, which is basically our chance to get involved with the fans, talk about the game of football in a more analytical way, as well as give a different take on it. We talk about Arsenal, we talk about football, we talk about tactics, we talk about all kinds of things football. We have with us today two of our main hosts, myself as well. I'm Karen. We've got CK and George with us. And today we are talking about how players adapt to the Premier League. So, what does that mean, guys? Anyone can go for it. What do we mean by adaptation?
Well, I mean, simple. I don't think there's really a tactical answer. It's how do you fare in the Premier League as compared to other leagues? What makes the Premier League so different? Because I think what a lot of people may understand adaptation to mean either from a team. There's a dressing room. You can get really minutia with it and get really tactical. But fundamentally, how I look at it, how do you adjust to the speed of play that you're going to be kind of experiencing on a day-to-day basis, not just in big games and rival or derby games, but how do you experience that as a floor? How do you experience that facing relegation fodder? How do you deal with that kind of intensity on a consistent basis, not just in spurts? That for me is the EPL adaptation. And of course, you've got your dressing room dynamics, you've got synergies within a team that we can get into, but I think that lends into maybe a wink, wink to a future podcast that will make where you get into the minutia of team dynamics. But fundamentally, the league, it's all about intensity, really. And I hate to be that trope, but there really is no more simple way of explaining the difference between leagues. It's simply intensity.
Yeah, with the adaptation, it's like how do you get used to the eyes on you? How do you get used to the unpredictable weather? Because a lot of people have struggled to get used to the weather.
Yeah,
So the Premier League just brings a different dynamic to certain stuff because with the weather aspect, a lot of the other big countries was like always sunny or generally sunny. So then when you come to the Premier and it's sunny at 11 and the game starts at 12:30 and it starts raining heavily, how does a player like get used to that? So it's just to bring a big like dynamic.
I mean, for me, there are four main elements, which both of you pretty much covered already. There's the cultural aspect that Chris just mentioned, weather-wise, um, language-wise. How do you like living in a different country, etc. Things that any person, like when I went abroad, these kinds of things you think about. Um, the next is obviously physicality-wise, as George and Chris have mentioned. The Premier League is one of the most physical leagues, if not the most physical league in the world, and you need to be able to adapt and get to make sure that you are available to be fit for multiple games in the season. Next is tactical awareness. Can you understand where you are tactically on the pitch in terms of where you need to be on the pitch in a Premier League game, because they're not exactly, the game doesn't translate. We'll get into different leagues later, but I'll give you an example. The Bundesliga tends to be a bit higher. Can you adapt to attacking a lower block in a Premier League situation, or a mid block in a Premier League situation? Where are you tactically aware? And the last is in terms of the club itself. How does the club fit for you, and how do you fit the club? And that sort of relationship, how is that cultivated? And that can also contribute greatly to EPL adaptation. So talking of EPL adaptation, before we get into the specific leagues, I want to talk about why we prefer picking players in the Premier League and why they have such a tax in quotation marks on them. So homegrown tax is obviously different from EPL tax, but there is a premium to get within the league. So I want to ask both of you guys, why do we consider the Premier League such a gems from the Premier League such at a value, at a premium?
Well, I mean, quite simply, like the thought behind it is that they're simply used to the intensity. They're simply used to competing on a day-to-day basis at the level, right? They have experienced that pressure. They've experienced that kind of pressure cooker and come out of it in a way where they've been able to maintain performance, whether that's good or bad, by the way. Like, that doesn't mean that guarantees an exceptional performance, but it allows us to understand their baseline in terms of what they will compete with on a regular day-to-day. Now, for me, I actually have a very unsurprisingly different view of this. I think that this whole Prem proven debate is really useless. I've talked about this kind of on Twitter in many instances where I do believe that there's specific traits that you need to look for a league adaptation. But fundamentally, for me, the biggest adaptation successes have come with clubs that have valued their ethos. So what I mean by that is, you take Arsenal, for example, who are really kind of a bookmark club in terms of going from a truly domestic time in their history to clearly becoming one of the most international, well-known teams, and foreign teams, you may call it, and achieving success on both angles. What I mean by that is, when you kind of evaluate the George Graham era and the success of what that kind of brought, the backdrop of an all-English spine defense coming through, what that allowed for the game in terms of them succeeding in a much different way to our foreign success in the Invincibles. You can kind of really see a bookmark where Arsenal were really known as the foreign team within the league at that point. The amount of foreign recruits and imports that they did. And, I think their success of being invincible wasn't too shabby. So, so when you're looking at in terms of, successful adaptation, right? And whether or not imports or domestic imports, which one do you go with? They bring both pros and cons to each. I would rather we get away from the simple-minded association of intensity, because I think you can replicate a lot of this stuff and look for these mentality changes in specific situations for players. That doesn't necessarily need to have that, pressure cooker every day where you guarantee success. I think there's kind of apagogical examples both ways. Either domestic imports failing and domestic imports were great, and then moving teams and failing. There's just an unpredictability in transfers that, I think we all have to become accustomed to. But really, it's a lottery and it's a probability. It's educated guessing. And for me, the best way to do that is to have a checklist of specific traits, specific mentality aspects that you look for that can replicate this pressure cooker environment. For me, that's the most important thing, because I believe that there's so many factors involved in an adaptation for a player that simply saying the environment is the product of the player is not true. The product is always and will be the player. And so that unique individuality is always going to be the most important aspect of any transfer, any import, any kind of adaptation in general. Yeah. So that's the case maybe for the opposite in my mind. But there is benefits to domestic. Like I said, you'd have a baseline measure for what they're going to deal with in a pressure cooker environment. That could be good or bad, right? And of course that can change, but at least the worst aspects. I think that's probably the biggest benefit I can give a homegrown import, is that the worst level that they can reach.
Yeah, you have a baseline.
You have the worst, whereas a foreign import, there is a level of just kind of variability. As much as I may believe in a player, right? I've never seen them at their worst in the league. And
I mean, so I think the main, before I get into Chris, I just want to give a couple of pure examples. So I would look at someone like Juan Sebastian Verona, who's a very, very, very clear example of someone who is elite in one league and didn't really reach the same levels in another league. I'm going to hand it over to Chris now, but I'm just going to give you a sort of, just to back your point up, George.
And just before you go, Curran, that's an excellent example of foreign. But just before Chris goes, let's look at Torres. That's an excellent example of domestic in the league failure, where it's just, again, the variability. And again, I don't want to lean on examples, but just for people, you're right, Curran, we should cite examples because people need those. But one player doesn't indicate a trend.
No, but I'm just saying it's to do with
certainly gives you an example of that variability that what we're talking about.
It gives a human aspect to the points we're saying is what I was trying to say. Via Chris, all yours, mate.
What you guys were saying about the Prem proven aspect being a bit overrated, I do agree with to an extent, because I think that clubs look at Prem proven because it just to minimize risk. especially in a situation where you need a quick turnaround. A lot of teams tend to look at within the country because they want to minimize the risk of the big money they spend. There are examples of players doing well at one club and then doing well at another in the league, like Rooney or Ferdinand. They moved teams within the league and did well, but there are other examples of players who didn't, like you guys were saying, Torres, and there's players who've come from other countries and just, like Diego Costa, who came in 2016 and then got 20 goals straight away and then won the league. So it's just like there are players who come and go and do well, like, but it's just with the adaptation, a lot of it is to do with mentality. As I've said, like certain players just can't handle the shining lights. They can't handle, because when you do go to another team, especially in the Prem from our other team, there's more viewers, there's more money,
Yep.
your price tag is bigger, there's more expectation. So you know, immediately you know, because even as a player, even if you didn't know about all the facts about the TV view and all that stuff, as soon as you do get signed, all your Instagram followers and interactions are going up. So you're realizing there's more people looking at me now. There's more people, and then a lot of people can't handle that, which is why a lot of players you see fail. And another thing about signings coming in is that certain players haven't gotten used to the fact that they're gonna play a Brighton or a Burnley, a lower league side, and they're gonna get the same intensity and fight that they would get from a top team. For example, a massive example was Timo Werner, who came to
Mm.
Chelsea for 50, 54 million. First game, he goes, "What? I've never seen this before. Massive defenders like this, strong indoors, but we're going and we're winning, but they're still attacking us. They're still pressing us." And I'm like, how do I deal with this? So like, Werner still hasn't adapted fully
Mm.
as people expected him to, because he was a big money signing. But that's just a prime example of, I'm in a top team in Europe. I finished second in my league. I come to Chelsea and I just can't. I've seen
Can't.
something
There's a different
totally,
level. There's a different level.
yeah.
And I mean, just to pivot, Chris, like really quickly, that isn't just a new thing, by the way.
No.
Arsene Wenger famously did that with Robert Pires. His very first game, he had him sit on the bench and just watch Southampton. So when you're
Yeah.
looking in terms of, this idea of, an EPL adaptation, I think it's a valid concern, guys, that has stretched generations. This isn't a new thing. This isn't a modern game evolution. It's been like that in the Prem for over 20 years, and it's going to maintain to be that way because I think the culture of that club is what is so fundamentally different from other leagues, which I'm sure we'll get into. Because when you talk about an ethos of football and culture, I think that bleeds into kind of your play and what you expect of the product. And so that difference, I think, is going to be the same as we look beyond, but also in the past, because it always predicts the future.
Right. So we're just been joined by Priv Arsenal C, so I'm going to bring him in on this one. We're talking about the examples of adaptation and how we're talking about adaptation. Do you have an example you'd like to talk about domestic adaptation or foreign adaptation?
So wait, are we talking about how foreign players come into Premier League and how they adapt to the league, or?
Yep. Or you can say, for example,
Yeah.
or an example on the other side where a domestic player has moved to another club and hasn't really settled in. Either way, you can go.
Mm-hmm. I mean, to determine there's obviously both sides of the argument. As you guys already know, I'm probably more of an advocate of signing players within the league because I come of the opinion that I think that if you've already have had taste of the Premier League, for instance, you can go into another club within the Premier League and you'll adapt much quicker than, let's say, playing from, let's say, La Liga into the Premier League. It'll probably take them a bit longer, and you know that it takes them to settle down is basically the adaptation period, or sometimes they may not even adapt at all. So I always feel like going within the Premier League, for instance, would probably be the safer bet for clubs that can't afford to wait around. They need instant impact in certain areas. Whereas if you're looking for like a long-term project, then of course, why not try and get a player from Premier League and wait it out and see how he fares. Maybe he might be even better than he was in his previous league. You never know. I mean, we've seen that with Santi Cazorla when he was in
Mm.
Spain. He was, he wasn't scoring the amount of goals that he did in the league. He exploded in the Premier League. So again, it
Yeah.
just matters. It's just different for every player. But yeah, just to be safe, why not just recruit within the league, of course.
Yeah. So I'm gonna move on to specific leagues now, and if anyone wants to take them, just hand up and let me know. So let's start with La Liga. Does anyone want to talk about adaptation from La Liga, or should I take it?
Yeah, I can go really quickly. So in
Yeah, go
terms of
for
La
it.
Liga, I actually rate La Liga as the second best quality myself. When I'm looking at kind of foreign imports and I do my little chart in terms of what I look for, I find that La Liga has the best blend of, for me at least, intensity and quality on the ball. And I feel as though the spectrum of different isn't as great in La Liga as compared to other leagues. So what I mean by that is just like the Prem, I look at whose floor is the greatest within the league. And when you look at, good and bad teams, you get a spectrum, right? How tight is that spectrum? Because the beauty of the Premier League is that it is so
It's
tight.
very tight, yeah.
And so when you are looking at, other leagues, I do find that, Ligue 1 and, the Bundesliga have a greater spread between their worst team and their best team. And so for me, La Liga imports excellent in that aspect. Um, you know, Alternatively, I think with La Liga, what you do get is more superstar clubs. And so
Yeah.
with that, there is a certain money aspect. So you are going to get, of course, when you have a greater number of super clubs, so to speak, you're going to get a greater amount of quality within the league because they do tend to poach. I find with the Bundesliga and Liga, you are susceptible to maybe 2, now 3 clubs very broadly. In both, really. So, in Bundesliga, you're looking at maybe RB Leipzig are a new recruit to the elite, but you're really only looking at Dortmund and Bayern traditionally as, some great teams. And then when you move to Ligue 1, it's really PSG. Lille is a surprise new addition, but then Lyon. And again, beyond that, though, there's
There's not
a
a lot,
greater
yeah.
spread
I
of the
mean,
worst teams. But you look at La Liga, you've got some traditionally dominant forces in Villarreal. You've got Atletico Madrid,
Valencia,
your Real
yeah.
Madrid, your Barcelonas. I think there's more in the realm of 5 to 6 great
Yeah.
clubs.
Sevilla, for example.
Sevilla, exactly. Yeah. And so just naturally, that will increase the quality of the league for me. But in terms of looking at specific traits, when you're looking at technical qualities, one of the greatest aspects that I look for, and we'll do our profile of our EPL player, but the reason I really love La Liga is half turn ability. It's one of the biggest metrics that I look at for a Premier League proven adaptation period. And what a Spanish player does, they have kind of mirrors, I call it, or wingtips kind of on the side. And, if you do talk with anybody that is associated with Spanish football and that mentality is that peripheral vision that we call it. So that vision kind of looking out the side of your view or your scanning, it is absolutely embedded in their culture. And so that for me is a very critical pillar to EPL adaptation. And every single Spanish player, regardless of their physical qualities and their ability on the ball, has that consideration. So when they do receive the ball, they're constantly taught from young ages to scan, to look back, to see behind them. And I believe that skill is different from Ligue 1 and different from the Bundesliga. That's a cultural thing within Spain that I believe is embedded, and it's a key pillar to our adaptation domestically at a Premier League level. Having elite half-turn ability and scanning is one of the key ways that you get out of tight situations, and that applies to any league. And so for me, that's why La Liga rates as the second best quality team in general, and really probably the one trait I would associate with them that is excellent and what I look for in their foreign imports.
All right, so I'm gonna give. I'm actually gonna pick this because I feel like I've got this one in the bag. So I'm gonna give Bundesliga to CK, and I'm gonna give Serie A to Priv Arsenal C. Who wants to go first? Z or CK?
I'll go. So the Bundesliga is a weird league in the sense that tactically it's probably different to every other league because of the high lines that are played in that
Exactly,
league.
yeah.
So when players from that league go to other leagues, it probably may take them a bit more to adapt because they're not used to seeing different things. And with the Bundesliga, it's an intense league, but after maybe 70 minutes, I think in a lot of their games
The
team
physicality, the levels drop. Yeah,
the intensity definitely drops because
yeah,
a lot of the teams there's a big disparity between, for example, Bayern and a smaller team, for example, Hoffenheim or something, who have dropped and were good but dropped. So like with the Bayern league, I think players will struggle, especially attackers. They do struggle to translate their numbers to other leagues, especially to the Premier League. Because if you've seen all the attackers that have come, like Mkhitaryan, all of them, their numbers dropped apart from Aubameyang, whose
yeah,
numbers essentially stayed the same.
which is
So
mental.
yeah, and Aubameyang was an anomaly in that trend because Werner's numbers dropped, Havertz's numbers dropped, Mkhitaryan, all of them are prime examples. Your numbers
Gundogan
drop.
struggled. Just to back you up, Chris, it's really only, I would say, in the last year or two that he's really exploded. I think Gundogan struggled when he first came
Yeah,
in.
he did. And only Aubameyang and De Bruyne maybe were the ones that
Well, De
stayed.
Bruyne was here before as well. Don't forget.
Yeah, they stayed at that level, which was a weird one to see because, and then when you look at the league, is because of there's less space and there's actually just bigger defenders and more intense defenders, which their attackers seem to struggle with, which is why you see their attackers struggle to translate their numbers to the Prem.
Right. So
The only thing, sorry, just Kern, just to really
Yeah.
bounce off the Bundesliga point, I think the reason that there is such a risk in that Bundesliga is they attempt. It's going to sound as an insult, but it isn't meant. It's a B-Tech Premier League in their approach, where they do tend to want to play a high line and they do want to tend to be a counter press, but they don't have the same intensity in their counter press across the leagues. And so what that does, though, is when you have pressure from behind, and this is why I always predicted Havertz to struggle in his first season, is because while he's got great half turn ability, he really struggles in contact, and you don't see that space in the Premier League. You do get that in the Bundesliga. So when we talk about space, sure they sprint, sure they have counter press and that, but the spaces within that counter press are greater than 5 to 10 yards. Whereas in the Premier League, it's within 5 yards. You have, Lewis Dunk, who's from Brighton, who doesn't care and will get up your arse right away and will not give you the time of day, right?
No, he will not.
I use that example very purposely, by the way. Webster and Brighton are a huge test and an example of exactly what we're talking about. When you're looking at Hoffenheim and these other areas, while they may want to employ a high line, which by the way, Brighton do, they play football very progressively, okay? And, they do build up quite well. The difference between a Brighton, for example, and maybe a Hoffenheim, who both want to employ a high line, is that Brighton's distances are much tighter. They're much closer together. And that physicality and the challenge of the first 5 yards is the critical difference. And that is the reason that you get the variability. That is the reason why Bundesliga clubs, top clubs recruit there because, defending in a high line, that's the mentality of most top clubs. So you'd think they've played in a high line, they're used to it. But the way that high line is employed is very different. And I think my last thing is just, I always say that tactics aren't the problem. It's how you employ them are the problem. So, for example, a 3 at the back is not a defensive system. How you play that could be defensive, but it could be very attacking. And, the same reason with why a high line in one league doesn't guarantee the success of a high line in another is exactly that trait.
Right. So just to give Z his time, let's talk Serie A. Z, what are you feeling?
No, to be fair, I did a bit of research on Serie A the other day when I was looking at a player like Locatelli. And
Okay, so I got
on the
lucky.
back of Mark Goldbridge. It was Goldbridge's tweet when he said he was talking about the tempo of the league is much slower to the Premier League. So the Premier League players are just need to just get on the pitch and just show intensity, and then they'll beat them on that day. And I had a look, and I found out actually that the average age of Serie A players is considerably higher than the other top leagues. And when you look at it from that perspective, then it's not wrong when you have players like Ronaldo, when you had De Rossi, all these players that they've played until their mid-30s. So it kind of gives off the impression that older players find that league a lot more comfortable to play in. Perhaps perhaps it's much more of slower league, where you don't need to use excess physicality. As well as that, I believe when you look at certain clubs like Juventus, they already have the monopoly, have the best players, etc. So it's almost guaranteed. Apart from last season, where Inter Milan won the league, it was almost guaranteed that Juventus would have won the league. So there was a lack of competitive edge there. So I kind of made sense for other clubs within the league to sign those kind of older players who had experience. And like right now, we saw Zlatan still playing. How old is he again? In his almost 40, isn't he?
He's 36, I think now, isn't he?
Who?
Or 37. Zlatan.
Zlatan is 39.
Is he 39? God, jeez.
38
Okay.
or 39 now.
I thought he was younger than
So
that. Good God.
He still plays that league, like he's at least 10 years younger, and so that league kind of gives off the impression that they like to play in that because they don't feel that physical. They don't feel physically challenged either. So I don't know. I feel like it's a glorified MLS in my opinion, where players like to retire there. Anyway,
Yeah, that league generally is older because you had guys like Goran Pandev who were there for years.
You do, but you know what? I'm just gonna play devil's advocate here, because look, Serie A was a titan 10 years ago. It was the league, by the way.
It was the league, yeah.
Early 2000s. Maybe 1999, around there. That was peak Serie A. Back there.
The whole of the 90s. The whole of the 90s.
The entirety. And the reason is, though, the one thing I'll say about the Serie A is I agree with you guys. I think the age has increased in the last 10 years. It's been a part of their league quality decline, for sure.
Yeah.
But in terms of tactics, I actually think there isn't really a much more challenging league tactically than the Serie A. If you're going to look for defensive blocks, mid blocks, and you're looking at players being exposed to kind of breaking down those traditional low block teams, because that's really what an Italian team does. They keep their distances quite tight. Every single Italian manager in that league has an appreciation for formations and emphasis on it. So it is drilled quite well into the culture of that team. And so what you do find is not just defenders necessarily, but the idea of, these players being able to understand the tactical switches and elements is a lot easier, I find, from Serie A imports. So that's the only thing. But I will say Serie A has the lowest adaptation out of any league for the Premier League, and that is no coincidence.
I think it's because of the uniqueness of the league.
Yes.
And I think it's,
and there is that can't be disputed. So while I did spend the last couple of minutes being a devil's advocate, I do want to be clear. Serie A has the lowest percentage of ever imports, and I don't believe there's been a elite Italian import into the Premier League. There has not been an elite one. There's been good players that have done well, but there has not been a bona fide superstar, whereas I believe that has been the case in every other league. And I think that can't be coincidence.
Zola?
A lot of the players that leave there.
You think that's elite? You think Gianfranco Zola was elite?
I don't think he was elite, but I think he's a good. Or maybe Di Canio. These are the best names. These are the best names. You know what I mean? These aren't elite. I'm just backing up your point here.
Yeah.
Literally, I'm trying to think of people that you could consider elite, but these are the best kind of names you come in. They back up your point, mate.
I think it's a general thing where Italians don't actually like to move to England for some reason. I used to work in an Italian company, right, and they hate the culture of England. And I think it's where they like France, they like to move to Spain, they like to move to a country where it's completely opposite to where they live, right? So it's probably just a personal it's just a personal take where players saw the
A
Premier League.
cultural thing. Yeah.
Yeah,
Yeah.
it's a cultural trait where they're like, no, let's not. I don't want to move to England. No, I wouldn't
And
like it.
that's in London, because in London that's probably the most cultural appreciative
Diversity.
city.
Yeah.
Diversity in England. So imagine someone telling you that in London, and imagine them going to like Nottingham or something and asking them about their transition.
I don't know, lads. Like I get the culture argument, but then I look at like Spain, and Spain is quite similar to Italian culture in terms
Yeah,
of,
it's
look, I'm a
true,
Greek
yeah.
man, and many people know that I'm of Greek heritage, and the idea of that culture is so similar. Italian, Spanish, the siestas, and I don't know if it's entirely culture. I will
I
say
think
the one player that I had bookmarked as potentially breaking the trend, and I don't know if he will due to injuries, was Zaniolo. And he was
Yeah.
the anti-typical. Actually, when you look at the most successful Italian player of the tournament, in my opinion, Chiesa, he's your anti-typical Italian by profile. He's very much, a person who likes to stretch opposition and enjoys the intensity of leagues and
so
ball
direct.
striking.
Yeah, very
Yeah.
direct.
So I actually think we may see a change. We may, because I'm seeing these profiles crop up a lot more than we did in the past. For example, the best
Yeah.
Italian players were traditional Italian players, but now
Yeah.
we're seeing enough youngsters that are cropping up that are in that mold of the modern game. So maybe we see a trend. But yeah, I agree, guys. Like Serie A,
Quickly on the Serie A
worst.
thing is like quickly, a lot of their players struggle to. If you look at the sprinting measures, Serie A is generally either fourth or fifth with league, and them two are always brought on average team sprints, sprinting activities, intensity. Them two leagues are always lower. And then if you see a lot of the interviews of the players who have come to the Prem recently, like Felipe Anderson, for example, was like, for my first 10 games, I couldn't even go to 70 minutes. I couldn't do it physically. I just had to come off, and 60 minutes I always getting subbed, and I just couldn't handle it. So when you look at players, like the intensity, even though tactically is probably the best or on the same level as the Prem, it's just intensity is just a different level of the other leagues in comparison to Serie A.
So quickly, I'm going to move on to Liga and plus others. I'll do that. But before we do move away from the Serie A, my final point will be the tactical situation in Italy is unique. They consider they look at the game of football very differently. It's like me saying Georgia's Premier League and I'm Serie A. Like we have fundamental differences in how we look at the game of football. They have a very tight system. They prefer to allow a slower tempo. They don't mind not having the ball. They want to make sure they are compact, and they will advance at their own pace. They love a three at the back, which it just bores the hell out of me. Like, just come on, guys, three at the back. What are we doing? It's
You know what's
2021,
ironic,
guys.
Curran, just really quickly? Do you know that the most successful Italian import was probably Thierry Henry?
Most likely, yeah.
And
Most
he's
likely,
not a tradition. He's not an Italian player, and he's not a typical Italian player. I was actually just thinking about, has there been an import? It's probably Thierry Henry. Just for people that look back.
He was in elite in Italy.
Even Dennis was.
Even Dennis, yeah, and Dennis did come from Syria, and he came at the peak point too, right? But those aren't Italian players.
No, no, God, no.
It kind of leads to that aspect. But yeah, go
Right,
on. And yeah, I think Liga is an interesting one because
so if we're gonna, we'll do Liga, and then I'm gonna move on to the Belgian / Dutch league as well, because in terms of that is a very interesting league to do. And then we'll move on to the EPL play, as it was. So with Ligue 1, if you look at Ligue 1, as George mentioned earlier, it's a very wide league in terms of quality. The main thing I want to say is that Ligue 1 is a very young league as well in general. The average age, I have it up here, like the oldest average age squad is 26.5. That's the oldest. The youngest is Stade Rennes at just under 23 years old. The talents there, let's be real, it's basically it's a factory, it's a talent factory. They have a lot of players that go there on loan. Cough, William Saliba. That clubs send their players on loan there because in terms of on the ball, you are afforded more time on the ball in terms of when you receive the ball. It's not the distances aren't as short. They do allow you to get a bit more time to progress the ball, a bit more time to adapt to how the football goes. In terms of the you get to play. If you say you go to a Stade Rennes or something, or a Saint Etienne, that you're playing against teams of all different abilities. You're playing teams that are not as great that you can really get your teeth into. You're playing PSG, so you've got a full spectrum of teams. It's great for clubs to actually put their players in and say, look, go and get some time. But in terms of the actual quality of football, I don't like watching Ligue 1 very much. I liked watching Lille last season, as I think all of us did. We all liked watching Lille last season. I can see Sika going, yes, for sure.
Hence my love for
yeah, yeah. There we go. The Yilmaz shout back. But I think with the Ligue 1, it's very clear that you have a league that is trying to develop a style of football. I don't think they have a very defined tactical style in Ligue 1. I think it's a league that's constantly evolving. The talent is very raw and often getting poached as well. So I feel like it's something that I don't know if you guys have any tactical sort of, like, it's not like the Bundesliga with the high line, or it's not like the Premier League with high intensity. I don't think there's a defined style.
You're spot on, Kern. Like, there isn't a footballing philosophy that's necessarily generalizable in terms of that culture. But the one thing that I do say is, their spectrum of good to bad is the largest across the leagues, and that is why I believe that it is the worst quality. But that doesn't mean the individuals are worse. I think that's just a nuanced argument that a lot of people aren't able to comprehend, where when you do get that spread, what these talents actually look for is they're given a chance. They really are. They're given a chance to make their mistakes and to become the players that they are. There's no kind of surprise when I hear you say that they're the youngest average age, I would argue, out of any league. That doesn't surprise me. They're the league willing to offer chances the most, because the quality is so great that ultimately they have to bet on youth in order to maintain not even just competitiveness, but integration in the league. Like the amount of turnover in Ligue 1 in terms of up and down is very consistent. If you were to look at, say, let's say the Premier League, Serie A, Bundesliga, the teams that are relegated and then come back up, they're very few and far between of those repeats. Whereas in other leagues, you see that, and that's because their quality typically is a lot greater. But in Ligue 1, that quality difference isn't the same and isn't as tight, and that's why we may see an individual league quality. But you can't refute that France, I think, arguably in terms of a country, even not just modern way, but even across the decades, have produced potentially the most generational talents.
Look at their squads right now. Look at their squads. Look at their under-23 squad. I think their under-23 squad could compete in this Euros.
And Kern, I even want to go farther, because I don't want to get stuck in recency bias, but you look at legends of the game, right? I think France arguably have probably the greatest pool of legends of the game. People that are going to affect your fabric of the club in a playing atmosphere,
And it's not even the floor.
Arsenal perspective.
It's not even the floor. The ceiling is so high. You've got the likes of Platini, Zidane, Henry, Vieira, etc. Desailly, Petit,
Lilian Thuram, Yeah, it's just, the list is insane, and I don't think that's coincidence, right? There is something in the water in France, 100%.
And their list is not like, for example, Brazil, which is mainly offensive talent. There's a spread across the whole pitch.
That's exactly what I was going to get into. When you look into it, I think goalkeeper is probably the only position that hasn't produced a generational talent.
Come on, man.
From a French
you're forgetting Fabien Barthez. Come on, man. Don't be saying.
No, sorry. but that's the issue, right? So when you do look at cultures, I've always said this as a player. My best IQ for a player is, can they do it in multiple thirds of the pitch, right?
Yeah.
But that also comes from a coaching philosophy. Are you able to coach in multiple thirds of the pitch? And with France, I guess the point that I'm coming down to, Lilian Thuram, Vieira, Henry, wingers, you want to go through, your Pires, in every area of the Ribéry. when you're going in different areas of the pitch, they have an elite generational talent that you can provide an example for. So individually, it's probably the league with the greatest prospect, but potentially the greatest individuals. But I just want to make the point that spread. So I hate to go down to statistics, but it is my wheelhouse. When you do look at that stuff, the variation between the worst and the best player is the greatest in Liga, right? And that's kind of the reason. While you may have a lot of great players, that spread being so great dilutes the quality of the league, essentially.
So, like, in terms, as I was saying that before. So the point I was making is that it's so good for teams to send players to Liga because of the variety of levels you can play, the opposition you can play against. You can play against PSG, or you can play someone like Nantes, who aren't exactly the best team in the world. So you have a variety of challenges for your player to go out on loan and try their mettle. I think the main thing in terms of French philosophy around football, I think they pride themselves on their technical elegance, but they will not let you slack physically. If you look at their players, it's not as laissez-faire as a Spanish system, where as long as you have that technical elegance and you are tactically aware, we're going to allow you to pursue that. And then so coming back to the Bundesliga and Serie A, it's the different things. Okay, so what we're going to do now is in terms of an EPL player. So when you're looking for an EPL player, I'm gonna pick. We're gonna go around this. We're gonna go around the panel. I'm gonna ask for one trait from each of you, and then if anyone at the end wants to add anything, we can go around the end.
But physical trait.
Yeah, any trait. Could be physical, mental. Hell, talk about emotions if you want. I don't care. Just give me a trait, and then we'll move on. We'll go in a circle here. We'll start with CK and go around.
Okay. There are many things you could probably mention, but I think being able to adjust to a cultural difference is a big one. To come to England in general, because England itself is a weird place, because you could go to London, a different place, and you feel like you're in a different world or something. So like being able to adjust to like the weather and the people, and being able to like change and still be the same person or the same quality in a different environment, just to keep it short.
All right, George.
Everyone knows I've said it in so many different pods.
Yeah.
Elite half-turn ability and a 5-yard burst that can maintain over 15 yards. Those are the minimum pillars of EPL adaptation. And the only example that I'm going to give is probably somebody that's not well known for that in many circles, but it's David Silva. It's your perfect example of when I say
good
physical,
example.
It's not a monster. I'm very specific about half-turn 5-yard burst that can maintain over 15 yards. That is essential of any legend of the Premier League. And there's a reason, because they can roll contact. It is the single best metric that is used when you're looking at escaping pressure, because that's the thing with the Premier League. Like, we've talked about intensity, but really it's pressure from behind. It's the counter press. It's this
counter press.
It's the short spaces behind. So the idea that I just want to really focus is, look, half-turn ability, if you can escape that first challenge, excellent. But can you attack that space with the same intensity and pace to make it count, right? That's the big difference. Whereas, somebody like a Danny Ceballos, who has half-turn ability, but has no athleticism to take it over the first 5 yards, over the next 15, that's where you run into trouble. And so I make that because a lot of people maybe misunderstand what I mean about half-turn. It's not just being able to spin people. It's not just being able, to ride challenges. It's not just that. You have to make the opposition pay for that mistake. And that's the real key difference. And David Silva was one of the best players I've seen probably ever do that. And the intensity that he carried in that first 5 yards was absolutely immense, and it's what made teams pay. Santi Cazorla bringing it back home for us. Like, why did he translate so well but did so poorly at Malaga? Well, it's because that 5-yard burst from behind is breaking more lines in the Premier League than it does in Spain, right?
Right.
The idea that more players commit to that first counter press, that occurs in the Premier League. It doesn't in La Liga. So he was able to burst past players a lot more, and that translated to any third, right? When he moved back deeper, it didn't matter. That was kind of the main metric that you would use that would describe a lot of these success stories.
Right. So before I get to Zeke, I want to just quickly explain what we mean by what George just said. There's a difference between size and muscularity and ability to push and bulldoze through people and physicality. There's a difference. There's a clear difference. Because one involves explosivity and intensity and fitness, and the other involves raw power and strength. I think when people hear pace and power, they get confused about what power actually means. Sometimes power isn't all just burly strength. Power can mean someone like, I'm sure George can back me up on this, Luka Modric, who actually is someone who can powerfully run through lines. As we all know, he's not the biggest guy, but he has enough power in terms of 5-yard burst extending to 15 yards. His ability to run with the ball, it's powerful. It's not just a size, burly, oh my god, Yaya Toure type thing. So now we're just going to get Z's opinion on this. So give me a trait, Z. What are you thinking?
To be fair, man, I don't know if it's classified as a trait, but it's something that's probably not been mentioned. It's the fact that, I feel like Premier League players especially need to have a lot of mental strength. Purely because, the way people perceive Premier League football, the way the fans see Premier League football and the Premier League players, these fans live and breathe football, so they'd like to see these same players, go through with the same, passion on the pitch. And when we liken that kind of trait with mental strength to, let's say, someone like Mesut Ozil, people looked at him and would say, he's a weak player. He doesn't run on the pitch. When things are going bad, he hides. And we kind of saw that on the pitch as well when he played for Arsenal. When we were losing, he was one of the first players you can point out and say that he's fallen off. He does not want to be on that pitch. That's why I feel like it's very, very important to have mental strength, because when things are going bad for you on that pitch, that mental strength it's something that can turn everything around and take you further, maybe even change the game. And it's something that's very interesting to see is the fact that let's say even for Arsenal, we are signing we're signing players with specific qualities and specific traits in terms of their personality as well. We've seen someone like Lokonga that's coming in. He was a leader of his team. In Gabriel, you can see he talks on the pitch. He's got a lot of leadership there. We see someone like we've seen Mari. He's a leader. Cedric, he's a leader on the pitch as well. He speaks a lot of the. So you can see that you can see how important it is to have that mental strength on the pitch, and how one can take you in the Premier League. So I feel like 100% mental strength is really, really important.
And I think Z I want to back Z up on that. The reason that Z it's so important and why you're completely 100% correct is because the floor of the teams leagues, which we've talked about earlier in the past, just to bring it back to what we talked about, is so high in this league that your test of mental strength happens much more frequently. It's not something that you just have to get up for a specific game. It's not something that you have to happen in like 1 or 2 occurrences. The idea that you're going to be tested as a character happens in every game, because every single team believes they can win. I don't think the same can happen in every other league. And so when you see that test of character, if it's not, happening every day, then that is the key difference of the Premier League, right? Because it could happen every day here. You could come to face Fulham and they're not going to give up if they're 3-0 down. I look at West Ham in our own season. It's a case of us coming back, but this idea that you can be 3-0 down and the game is not over. You go
We
to
are a
another
prime
league.
example of that when we drew 4-4 to Newcastle.
Exactly.
Yeah,
Reading, I look back at Reading a couple years ago, 7-5. Like the idea that you can go 3-0 down or more and the game is not done does not exist in any other league.
No.
And so, and that you're right, Z. Like that's why I agree. I think it's a huge pillar to success.
And the
Right.
teams in our league, quickly, and the teams in our
It's
league have been given the financial capability to put themselves in a position where you just don't give up immediately to the top team, because in other leagues, like the disparity between money earned, for example, in the Liga, it's like a 4-1 between the money earned by Real Madrid or Barca to the bottom team in the league, whereas in the Premier League is 1.8-1, so being the difference between Man City and to who finished like Sheffield United, for example. So it's like if a team has the financial capability, and then the pull of being in the Prem in the first place, the Prem will always be like intense and fun to watch, because teams will always have the ability to beat the others. Like Aston Villa, for example, beating Liverpool 7-2. That doesn't happen in other leagues.
No.
So yeah.
I mean, just before we round off, I'm going to get some things that I feel are very key for adaptation in terms of our league. First of all, for me, it's quite clear. You need to have the ability to see the pitch in the 360 axis. You can't just have that ability just to go forward. You have to have the ability to understand tactically going back. You have to have the ability to realize where you are on the pitch and what zone you, as George likes to say, don't evacuate your zone. Make sure you stay to your zone. Make sure you don't. You are allowed to participate in both the block in a sufficient way, as well as transition and the attacking phase of play. You need to be aware enough to understand that the pace of the play that you're going to be playing at. So you have to be transitionally press resistant, and you have to be available to be a press trigger, especially in each in both phases of the game. So. What I just want to get across is the Premier League is tempo-wise the quickest league in the world. I think that can be disputed. And if you're going to be playing in the Premier League, you need to have the tactical awareness to understand what that tempo is. You need, for example, if you're a winger, you need to understand the famous La Pausa and the rhythm of the game. If you're in central midfield, you need the ability to be able to recognize transitions. You need to be able to go drop deep in blocks and participate and go forward and participate in build up. You need to be able to cross in the half space, etc. We'll get into all these different things on the pod next week. Wink, wink. But you need to have the ability to understand what the Premier League is as a league. And you have to have the ability to understand what your club is trying to do in the Premier League. So if you look at a club like Arsenal, for example, we have a history of free-flowing, aka fluid football. We have the ability to. We've had midfields like the Rosicki, Hleb, Fabregas era, where we had players roaming all over the pitch, technical leaders, excellence in going forward. You have to have an attacking mindset. You have to have the ability to understand the culture of the club and know that fans are going to want to understand that you know what the culture of the club is, and you know how to play in that culture, and their performances they can accept. Like guys, how many bad games did Alex Hleb have? He was an extremely good player, but he had a lot of poor games. But I know people that still love Alexander Hleb because he understood what being an Arsenal player was. Hell, people still like Kim Kallstrom, and he played like one game. If you have to ingratiate yourself into the culture of the club and the tactical awareness of the club. So just bringing it back. So the tactical awareness, cultural awareness, and the ability to involve yourself in all phases of the game. I'm gonna start bringing it to final thoughts now. So I want to go around the table and just think what any final points before we head out. Anyone can go.
I've got a couple things I like to say. So like, I think with the players transitioning or adapting to the Prem, I think it's much harder now than it is in the past, because as the game has been evolving, players have been given like a shorter transitional period to have a shorter time to adapt. Whereas in the past, you'd see with our own players like Perez or Henry got a lot of time to really adapt, and the fans and the owners like now expect instantaneous success, which is a harder like toll to take on certain players, which adds pressure to the bigger signings. For example, like the Pepes of this world, who are 72 million, but in his first season just didn't live up to the expectations. So them players will have have more expectation now than they did in the past to really get used to the league. And I also think for them players it's harder because the style of play for the Prem is like maybe more structured than other leagues and maybe more well executed team play. So it's harder for individual talents to really express themselves when trying to learn in a new league, which makes it harder for certain players to really become what they want. And then the last thing for me is like the intensity in the Prem is completely different to the other leagues, even statistically. So you can see that, for example, like the Prem averages 60 high intensity activities a game, and in Serie A it's like 55 for on a specific player. That demand on a different player will just impact them more so in the Prem than in the past, which is why certain players just seem to fail to adapt. So I think with the adaptation, I don't think fans necessarily help.
No.
It's just how it is nowadays, anyways.
It's the social media culture. It's just short gratification. We live our life in snapshots right now. That's kind of what we are as a generation, and that translates to your ability to perform. My only big round thoughts is I think a lot of people classify me, I'd argue incorrectly, as just a pace and power merchant. But one of the big things I wanted to close with is mentality, because it always separates a player. As a coach myself, I look at talented players, and I believe that mentality is the difference from you making it to a totally elite level or never making it at all. And that jump, you can have the same player traits that I love in players, the half turn ability, the 5-yard burst, the 15-yard burst. You can have those things and you can tick my boxes, but if you don't have the mentality to succeed, it's a big part of my scouting process personally, by the way. Like, I look at tons of interviews so I can get a profile. And the only reason I want to end on this is because I believe it's going to be a trait that we start to highlight in our targets further forward. The psychological analysis of a player is going to be critical to understanding the demand of short-term gratification. What do I mean by that? Very simply, social media, dealing with pressure, it gives a mental toll on you. And your ability to deal with that is just as much as physical. And that translates into your biggest moments, which is going to be emphasized a lot more than it has in the past. I look at Patrick Vieira, who gave away an FA Cup final to one of our biggest rivals. I don't know if he gets the same space and success in today's game to deal with that. That would be replayed over and over and over again. The idea that he goes from an absolute elite player to totally shit would dominate headlines in that instant. And that's a difference in today's game. And so I think the psychological aspect, you're going to start to build a psychological profile of a player that is in tandem to their scouting report, which they do. A lot of people have famously said, like, you talk to coaches and whatnot, but I believe a psychological profile of the type of player that you want will be developed. So things I look for just in terms of this is, how does somebody respond going one down? How does somebody respond in the first 15 minutes to end and to begin each half? These are things that I look for in players in terms of determining their success at a big club. And so you're going to need to, I think, emphasize that aspect going forward. So, yeah, that's really one thought I wanted to end with, because I feel like people classify me as a pace and power merchant, which I am, 100%. But that mental aspect is super important from taking the next step. It's the one thing that really separates your player from being very good to elite.
Right, Z, and then I've just thought of something, so go for it, Z.
Yeah, I mean, to be fair, I'd just like to mirror what George has said. To be fair, it's really, really important to have that mental aspect of the game because we've seen it, plenty of times where players and teams have been down and out, and if it wasn't for their mental strength, we wouldn't have seen a different result, or we wouldn't have seen a turnaround in the season. So I think it's really, really important in order to sustain yourself within that league. Otherwise, you realize within a season or two, you're out of that league. We look at players like Morata, for instance. He was a very good player at Real Madrid, at Juventus. He may have not scored all the goals, but people still, he still had a reputation. But when he came to the Premier League and everything was highlighted towards him at Chelsea, you could see how much of a mentality he had,
Yeah.
how weak mentally he was, and all the fans saw right through it, and they weren't having it. They weren't having it because a club like that has high standards. They had players like Drogba who had all the mental strength in the world, and now they have someone like Morata up front. They didn't want that, so in a season he had to leave. So yeah, in order to sustain yourself within that league, you do need that mental strength, and I think especially Arsenal, it's something that they're looking at it very, very specifically, and we can see with the targets and players that's coming through. So yeah,
Quickly
I mean,
to echo
no, yeah, go on.
the mental strength aspect is that. Whoa, sorry.
Oh, then it's fine. While ZK sorts out his fire alarm, I'll just think of say what I was trying to say before. People, I don't think anyone's mentioned. You need a good team around you as well. I mean, the people that you choose, your agent, your social media manager, if it were, your friends, the people you surround yourself with are going to contribute greatly to who you are on and off the pitch. So if you're not going to be someone, you need to have people that are around you that are going to elevate you and not just stagnate your career. You see people like Nicolas Anelka who fell into this trap, or people that are other people in more modern days who have been taken in and spit out by the game, and because of the people they've surrounded themselves with. You can think of the likes of until you recently turned around Jesse Lingard, who's had an extremely tough time because of the players, the people that he's surrounded himself with. It's a shame, but you need to be able to, as people, you need to be able to be a resistant to a resistant person, someone that will be able to actually stop the hate and the negative impacts of the game getting to you. You need a team. Like if you look at someone like Cristiano Ronaldo, who has he's constantly surrounded by people that are trying to protect him from the outside, or like Lionel Messi, any of these top guys, they all have great teams around them. They keep their strength and conditioning on top. They keep their social media tight. They keep their they keep everything they keep everything internal. They don't let things leak. They try and handle problems for themselves, and they try and interact with the league. Oh, we got CK back now. As much as they can. You all right? No fire there, I hope.
No, it wasn't even my fire alarm. It was next door.
You go, mate. I literally just finished. So
Yeah,
you
on
go.
the mental aspect, I was gonna say, like, we see a lot firsthand with Arsenal fans. You see, as soon as we're linked to a player, all the Arsenal fans are messaging him, following him in his comments. And if a player can't handle, so a player just notices the eyes on them immediately with the followers, the viewers, and all that stuff. So if you have that, the players will realize some players subconsciously just can't handle more eyes on them or more people scrutinizing their every single move. And if a player can't handle that, they won't be able to perform at their best. And in the Prem, it's a different level to every other league because it's by far the most watched league in the world. So with that comes more scrutiny, more money, which is why a lot of players come here. But with the money comes more criticism. And if a player can't handle that, they shouldn't be signed, which is why I think it's good that we're looking at that, because we have made mistakes with players like Mustafi, who just couldn't handle the fans. And he said it himself, he couldn't handle interactions with the fans at first. So we've seen firsthand how more eyes and more scrutiny and more interactions has affected our players.
Granit Xhaka as well, I think, is an example of that. Someone
Yeah.
who's struggled with the culture of our league, and I think he's been given. I mean, I don't particularly want him at the club, but I do understand the things that he's gone through are significant, and it shouldn't be taken lightly. But on that note, I think we're gonna close out. Thank you to everyone for listening, to subscribing, and interacting with us. The growth is still going strong. We're nearly at this moment of recording, we're at 338 subscribers, which is kind of mental. I mean, from the past week, I think it's been something like 50 or 60 subs, which is, I don't know, that sounds a bit crazy to me. Anyone else got any final words before we head off? Or
Yeah, just a massive thank you. Really, like I know that this doesn't, maybe it's patronizing to some, but honestly, this is the reason I wanted to get involved with guys, that I've come to, know as my mates. And honestly, I just wanted to take an extra 30 seconds to seriously thank everybody for continuing to do this. We're going to be pushing ourselves to create more for you guys. And yeah, continue to like, comment, subscribe, because your subscription allows us to keep doing this. So, as long as, we get people wanting to see it, we will keep producing it.
Z, I think you have something to say as well, mate.
Yeah.
That's crazy. I mean, to be fair, I genuinely can see the support and eyes on the channel. The other day, I was just on my work laptop, and I was on YouTube just searching just Ben White compilation, and on the side as well recommended why Ben White, something about Ben White, and it's the video that we uploaded, and I was like, wait, that's our video. I'm not subscribed because I don't have an account LinkedIn, but that's there, and I was like, wow, we actually have eyes, that's actually viewing our videos, and we're growing so quickly. And to be fair, when I was thinking about this idea of this whole YouTube channel, this whole podcast 2 months ago, I didn't realize it would actually come this far. So honestly, I'm just so happy. I just hope this continues.
Yeah.
Go on, so you can.
I just wanted to say that thank you for all the interactions, even though I've said before, I don't really like interacting with people. But
He'll hit you.
people don't interact. Yeah, we've been doing it for 2 months now. And the growth has been good to see, and the subscriptions have risen, the views. And I would advise you guys to turn on post notifications, because we're going to do some random lives in the near future, especially
for sure,
with signings and stuff. So there will be random shorter videos. But yeah, thank you for your support, and I hope it continues.
Yeah, as just a final word before I click off is thank you. We're really inspired. We've got lots of different ideas coming up. I think we're going to try and mix things up, keep the content fresh, and thank you again. I appreciate everyone for joining in. I appreciate the lads for having a spirited and lively conversation, and we'll see you soon. Like, comment, and subscribe. Bye now.